Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Inko Etade. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent. 32 more bodies unearthed in Kenya, reportedly linked to a doomsday cult that left over 400 followers dead 2 years ago. Led by controversial pastor Paul Mackenzie, the sect allegedly told its members to starve themselves in order to meet Jesus. Human Rights Watch accuses Mauritanian security forces of committing abuses against migrants, including torture and rape, in a new report. Mauritania, a key stop on the migration route to Europe, is backed by the EU and Spain, who continue to support its border controls despite the alleged violations. And a new wave of comedians in Burundi take on the government and the tightly controlled media with punchlines. The humorists are on a quest to use laughter as a bold new form of expression in the country. Thanks for joining us. Over 2 years since 400 bodies were found in connection to a doomsday cult in southeastern Kenya, authorities have now exhumed 32 more bodies linked to the same sect. Led by controversial pastor Paul Mackenzie, the cult allegedly told followers to starve themselves in order to meet Jesus. This latest discovery has sparked fresh criticism of authorities who had vowed to crack down on extremist sects. Well, Clemence Walla has the story.
Forensic analysts continue to inspect and search the site after a macabre discovery reopened fresh wounds in Kenya. Police over the past 2 weeks have discovered dozens of bodies in the village of Kwabinzaro, believed to be linked with the Good News International Church, an extremist Christian cult blamed for the deaths of over 400 people in 2023.
We have noted that at this particular site, the bodies look a bit fresh. They are not fully skeletonized, unlike last week. The bodies we exhumed last week were full skeletons with no flesh.
Police have taken several people into custody in connection with the newly discovered graves. They say initial findings and evidence suggest that the bodies may have been buried between March and July of this year. The Kenyan Interior Minister says Paul Mackenzie, the leader of the extremist sect, who is imprisoned and on trial for murder and terrorism, is still in contact with his followers.
One of the rescued persons told the Directorate of Criminal Investigations that Mackenzie called him from the cells and prayed for him through the phone. So you can see how rampant this case of religious radicalization is.
Kwabinzaro is located around 30 kilometers from the now infamous Shakahola forest. Prosecutors say that the cult leader ordered his followers to starve themselves and their children so that they could go to heaven before the world ended. The taxi driver turned self-proclaimed pastor has denied the accusations against him.
We're staying in Kenya, where weeks of violent protests are now shaking up the political landscape ahead of the 2027 election. Outspoken human rights activist Boniface Mungwani has announced his presidential bid, vowing not to work with anyone who is contaminated. Also joining the race is former Chief Justice David Maraga, who came out of retirement in June, saying he was shocked into action by President William Ruto's violent crackdown on protesters. Since taking power in 2022, Ruto's popularity has plummeted, fueled by economic stagnation, corruption, police brutality, and abductions of government critics. Next, 69 people have died after a boat carrying migrants capsized off the coast of Mauritania earlier this week. It's the latest tragedy on what is one of the deadliest migration paths, as many attempt to reach Europe by sea from Africa. It comes as Human Rights Watch accuses Mauritanian security forces of committing serious abuses against migrants, including torture and rape. Mauritania is backed by the EU and Spain, who continue to support its border controls despite the alleged violations. Well, the author of the reports from Human Rights Watch joins us now, Lauren Bird. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Lauren. Great to have you. I just want to start off with, obviously, your reports. It documents a wide array of abuses by the Mauritanian police. Tell us what some of the key findings are.
Yes, thank you very much. So our research actually looks over the span of the past 5 years since what's called the Atlantic route, the boat migration route from West and Northwest Africa towards Spain's Canary Islands, saw a resurgence since 2020 in increasing numbers, with last year being really a peak in number of arrivals. Crossing the Atlantic. So our report documents abuses in that context by Mauritanian security forces, including the police, including the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Gendarmerie, and the Army, in terms of migration and border control in Mauritania. So during interceptions at sea, after disembarkations, during arrests on land, and the abuses documented range from violence, beatings, and a few cases of rape and torture, but also widespread extortion of migrants in the country under the pretext of migration and border control, and then collective expulsions, mass expulsions of a number of different African nationalities to the border areas with Mali, which is experiencing armed conflict, and that poses a danger, and also to Senegal. So this is the context in which this has been going on for years, but the tragedies, the lives lost at sea are absolutely a major problem as well. And the Mauritanian Coast Guard and authorities are trying to rescue people. That's a positive. But we're looking at the broader context in which there's a lot more to be done and reforms that need to happen to ensure that people are treated humanely in Mauritania.
Your report really includes a lot of shocking revelations. You speak particularly about a Liberian man, Marco Gibson, who was brutally beaten by Mauritanian soldiers. Tell us about his story.
Yes, so that was actually very recent, and that happened in December of this last year, and then he was expelled to Mali in around the end of December. So I spoke with him in January from Mali, and he's a Liberian migrant. He was irregular in Mauritania, seeking to transit northward. So migrants in the country are sometimes moving through, passing towards Morocco, Algeria, other countries. Sometimes they come to Mauritania to work. Sometimes they want to cross the ocean. But in this case, he was trying to transit northward, and he and other migrants were intercepted, arrested by the army, the Mauritanian army, and beaten brutally. He described them beating him with whips and clubs, and then it injured his knee pretty severely. And then he was put into police detention and then expelled to the Malian border, where shortly after there was an armed Islamist group attack in the area. So he was again put in danger there. So the man really was mistreated all along his journey and his immigration experience.
We can see just from that footage there how serious his injuries were. Explain to us this partnership that exists between the EU, Spain, and Mauritania when it comes to migration.
So this is not a new partnership, and as we've seen in the news, the EU has been pursuing this approach of externalizing, as we call it, outsourcing migration controls to other countries, to migrants, countries of origin, and transit countries. They've been doing this for a long time, for many years. Mauritania is no exception. They've been ever since the early 2000s. They've been pursuing that approach. But last year, there was a renewed migration cooperation partnership announced by the EU with Mauritania to the tune of over 200 million euros in new support for Mauritania, with the view of combating irregular migration. And that partnership tackles a whole range of areas, some of which are much needed: rights, protection, development, but others include bolstering, again, still security to block and prevent irregular migration. So that means bolstering those same security forces, continuing to equip them and supply them with funding and other support to crack down on departures by boat heading towards Spain. I mean, that is the underlying objective here. And Spain bilaterally has been for years as well supporting Mauritania in its own way, and additionally has Spanish personnel deployed in Mauritania. You have Guardia Civil and police deployed on the ground, assisting the Mauritanian forces in operations of surveillance and interceptions of migrants and counter-smuggling, all of which is fueling the context in which people end up being intercepted and arrested. And then what ends up happening to many of them is detention and expulsion.
Lauren, really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the program and telling us about this extraordinary report. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, a major HIV vaccine trial has kicked off in Zimbabwe, aiming to boost the immune system's fight against the virus. The African-led study will test whether the new vaccine is safe and effective. The first doses have been given at the Mutala Trust Clinical Research Center in Harare. It's a milestone in global health, led by African scientists in a collaboration between researchers from Zimbabwe and South Africa. Sharon Manzin-Gezo has more now.
In a breakthrough for global health, the first doses of an investigational HIV vaccine trial were administered here at Mutala Clinical Site in Harare. This phase 1, first-in-human clinical trial in Africa will enroll 120 adults from the ages of 18 to 50 years. The participants will be monitored for over a period of 19 months for safety and immune responses. The clinical trial is taking place at sites in Zimbabwe and in South Africa.
So developing vaccines, particularly for us in Africa, needs us to understand the immune genes that determine how you and I respond to infections. Having studies, early phase studies, or what are also known as translational medicine studies done on the continent really enables us as scientists, clinicians, researchers on the continent to develop therapies and vaccines that are tailored to our needs and to our population.
Zimbabwe has about 1.3 million people living with HIV, and the country continues to prioritize receiving treatment. Zimbabwe has also achieved UNAIDS 95-95-95 targets in adults, meaning 95% of the people living with HIV know their status. Of the 95% of the people diagnosed are receiving treatment, and of the 95% of the people receiving treatment have also achieved viral suppression. The HIV vaccine trial is a huge step forward, not only for Zimbabwe and science, but for Africa as a whole.
Shifting gears now, we all love to laugh, and in Burundi, laughter is becoming a bold new form of expression. Away from official discourse and tightly controlled media, a new wave of comedians are turning daily life and politics into punchlines. The young comedians have found community on their quest to make others chuckle, and their jokes at times are biting but always cathartic. Juliette Montilli tells us more.
Qui a donné la permission à mon père de devenir jardinier? Pourquoi il plante des graines partout?
It's rehearsal day at the Buja Comedy Club. Young comedians put their material to the test, ideas flow, feedback flies.
Je pense qu'il peut exagérer sur ça parce que on a tous vécu ça. On est tous tes parents qui te disent j'ai été primé de la classe, et c'est là que tu comprends en fait. C'est une grande famille.
Buja Comedy Club is like a big family in a writing workshop where co-authors. I come in with a text, someone else adds their touch, and together we make it better.
In a country where freedom of speech is limited, comedy has become a rare and risky space for expression.
You can laugh about anything, it's just how you do it. With a bit of subtlety, it works. But if it's too crude, no.
Stand-up performers are finding support from places like the Itsuba Cultural Center, a hub for Burundi's emerging creative scene.
Our goal is really to show that youth have something to give back to the society. They have so much talent. But until now, it's been hidden, simply because they didn't have many places to express themselves.
Burundi has no formal art schools. Many comedians, like Huguette Irakoze, known as Aurore, trained abroad. And as a woman in comedy, her path was even more challenging. Tonight, she's performing at the Meat House and mentoring two young talents from the Buja Comedy Club.
There's a young person using their time wisely, and that makes you think. Comedy takes intelligence, so don't blame your kids or call them fools or delinquents. This really is a profession.
A profession, and one with a promising next generation.
Stay with us here on France 24. Plenty more to come.